So on the topic of dark entities, we talked about them a little bit vis-a-vis these, really malevolent characters like Jeffrey Epstein. Do you think they could be involved? Do you think these malevolent entities really exist?
As far as I'm concerned, I know for a fact there are dark, malevolent beings.
Like, it doesn't matter if we're talking about Western esoteric stuff, UFO stuff, people out there trying to do CE5 type things, visionary states. When you do make contact, how do you conceive of it? But also, how do you know whether or not it's something that you can trust?
I would say the classical magical worldview is that the universe is teeming with consciousness in ways, forms, and places which the modern worldview cannot conceive of. Kind of a cap on my long-winded answer. How do you trust these things? Is that
I do want to push you to share an impactful experience within the sort of like ritual context that was particularly profound. Is there a story to that effect that you can share?
Somewhat reluctantly, but sure. I saw a figure robed with a massive amount of golden light pouring out from behind him, and he had what looked like a mitre.
Whoa.
Okay, like a bishop's mitre. Yeah. Okay, and he was running in slow motion towards me.
I was thinking, one of the things that underpins, all of these realms of what we could call fringy, weird, paranormal, esoteric things is contact with something else or perceived contact with other entities, right? Like, it doesn't matter if we're talking about Western esoteric stuff, UFO stuff, people out there trying to do CE5 type things, psychedelic visionary states, whatever it is, there's always this. I think a lot of people have the goal of contacting some kind of other, wiser other, transcendent other. But I'm curious, in your practices, when you do make contact with an other, how do you conceive of it? But also, how do you know whether or not it's something that you can trust?
Well, in terms of conceive, the way I conceive of it is that it's a disembodied intelligence of some kind, most of the time. And because that's what I'm intending to call. In magic in particular, as opposed to something like mediumism, let's say trance mediumship, we have something very specific that we are attempting to commune with. And some of that can be to learn. Some of that can be because contact and communication with this thing is in itself divinizing. That's a very old idea, as you, in particular, are indubitably know. So the way that I conceive of most of these things are disembodied intelligence is effectively the magician's worldview, at least I would say the classical magical worldview, is that the universe is teeming with consciousness, in particular, in ways, forms, and places, which the modern quote-unquote Cartesian rational worldview cannot conceive of.
Yeah.
So everything has exhibits or possesses inherently a species of consciousness, down to things even at the molecular level. People like to think of molecules as kind of lifeless, inert, but that can't be true in order for them to have adhered to each other in the first place. There is a relationship of either attraction or aversion, bonding or dissolution. There are volatile interactions. This is a species of consciousness. It's not one that's as sophisticated as our human self-awareness is, but nonetheless, it is a species of consciousness because it's a recognition of relationship and then a response. So there's that kind of viewpoint that is much more freeing and acknowledges consciousness as something much, much bigger, much broader, that we have institutionally forced into an uncomfortably small box for a long time. And so when we contact these intelligences, they're effectively just disembodied intelligences. The same way my soul can be, if I'm doing exercises that involve, extrasomatic travel, let's put it that
Mhm.
way. But also when I die, when my physical organism dies, the belief is that the soul, the psyche, the psyche,
Mhm.
will continue on. I try not to get too mired in the, scientific justifications of stuff like that, because personally I don't need it. And I also think that when you try and start talking about energy and how it can be neither created nor destroyed, great. But, I don't, one of the key factors to successfully navigating what we are talking about here, this question or questions you have posed me, is the ability to hold multiple things uh, in your awareness without
Mhm.
needing one to validate, explain away, or sort of consume the other.
Right.
You need to be able to, as a magician, I think, as to be honest, as a holistic person, I think you need to be able to. We drank this Kool-Aid of this idea of cognitive dissonance. I don't think that's true. I think it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think that there has to only be one thing, one cause, one reduction, or reducible kind of factor, then yes, you're going to have an existential discomfort. But I don't think, nothing in the natural world works that way. A
Yeah.
tree is multiple things. It filters our gaseous refuse and filters it back to us as sustenance. It provides shade. It provides fruit. It holds the earth together, literally holds the ground together with
Mhm.
its roots. It is a home to many beings. So, it's this kind of thing. Now, that's how we conceive of it. Now, they have different tiers of autonomy. Not all of
Yeah.
these beings. I mean, humans are in a very interesting uh, place. We occupy a very special place in the cosmos, according to beings of a higher and a lower nature, in that we have free will. A demon can only act demonically in its core, which that is deceptively. Something like an angel can only act in the capacity within which it is enabled to function. It expresses
Mhm.
what we would
Mhm.
call a quote unquote personality of God, particularly if it's something like an archangel. Whereas an angelic choir performs a duty of some duty having to do with the organization and maintenance of the cosmos, so on and so forth. Um, they don't have the same autonomy that we do. We have free will here. It's bounded by things, sure. But that's the essential dichotomy of being in phenomenal reality. There's a deterministic component and a free will component, and they dance.
Yeah.
Now, finally, to put a kind of a cap on my long-winded answer, how do you trust these things? Is that I don't, and that's never, not really fully. No, I don't. There are methods by which we are taught to test these things, but
Mm.
ultimately, it's, you know. Uh, a lot of it is kind of developing that quote unquote sixth sense of intuition. What's the feeling? What's the energetic quality? What's the emotional quality? What's the somatic quality? Am I getting a knot in the pit of my stomach when this being is revealing itself to me in the scrying glass? Is there a coldness? There's many things that you take into account, but overall, um, there are certain things. There is a certain kind of light that lower order beings cannot fake. A
Hmm.
certain kind of light. Now, this goes all the way back to Iamblichus and his
Yes.
theurgic
Thank you. Thank
appearance.
you for bringing this up.
Yes, theurgic appearance. He talks about there is a certain type of bright, scintillating, white beyond white light that lower order organisms, even entities that are not technically bad or harmful or malicious, if they're lower on the hierarchical chain, that is closer to density, they cannot fake that light. Now, um, there are methods of testing them. These, you can find them if you're really looking for them. I can't divulge them because it's something that's a part of the esoteric order that I'm a member of. I can't just go about there willy nilly putting it out there for the public. But It's
Well,
out. It's definitely out there.
well, speaking of willy-nilly and gaseous refuse, I gave a talk at Contact in the Desert this year, and one of the points that I was trying to make is one of the core points that you just made, and I think maybe a little bit of a different way, but in a way that I think you'll probably agree with, which is, so one of the core points of the talk is that our current metaphysical map is not really up to the task of explaining the phenomenon, quote unquote, and all of its manifestations, all of the ways it can appear, all of the ways it can interact with consciousness. And of course, I posit a better metaphysical map for doing so is either the Neoplatonic one or Hermetic one. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap there, partly because it assumes that we are in multiple realms at the same time. Like we are participating in nous, we're also participating in generation, the world, soul, nature, all of these things. And the idea doesn't have to be like here or there. It can be here and there at the same time, working in multiple kinds of capacities on your being at the same time. So that's like such an important point because I don't think we have great ways to think about that. And if we do try to think about it in a multidisciplinary way, it's probably something like, binary spirituality or physicality. And it's not like it doesn't really make sense to us when it's both, you know?
Yeah.
Or we mistakenly make this sort of anthropomorphic kind of idea that it must be a winged guy who shows up if it's an angel, or it must be like this thing with horns with like smoke coming off of it that smells like a fart if it's a demon. Like it's like just stuff like that. So that is that was one of the core points. But specifically talking about Iamblichus, I actually use him and On the Mysteries as an example in this talk because one of the ways that these things manifest so often now in a way that people think about like a UFO kind of capacity is as some kind of luminous manifestation, like some kind of orb, some kind of light. And literally, as you already pointed out, this sage, for people that don't know, Iamblichus, this Neoplatonic, you know, philosopher sage who's literally doing this uh, ritual magic kind of practice called theurgy, that is partially lost art that you probably know a lot more about the technicals of than I do. But all of these beings that he talks about showing up, um, of course, the nomenclature he uses is more spiritual nomenclature. He's talking about gods, he's talking about angels, he's talking about daimones, he's talking about archons, heroes, souls, etc. But they're all showing up as qualities of light. To your point, they're all showing up as like various purities and dazzling or less dazzling forms of light. And I just thought that observation alone was so interesting. Like again, when you juxtapose modern orb UFO manifestations and what he's talking about, like it's too tantalizing for me to ignore. Not trying to say that like these are literally all the orbs are angels or demons. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying I can't ignore it. I can't ignore it.
Yeah, that's where we benefit from being able to evaluate things like UAP and the potential interaction with things, entities that we are not within the normal or typical scope of interface for us. Now, there is, well, actually, there's a scholar who's a friend of mine, and he put it in terms that I very much agreed with, and he articulated it in a way that I wasn't able to. But he said his name's Peter Mark Adams, and he talked about how, and it was a private conversation, but he said, probably the best way to know that that you're working with higher order entities is that you are in service, and not to the self, and 110%. It was something that my initiatory journey through things like the Golden Dawn had sort of revealed to me, and Peter just put it beautifully. So that's another way, but there's a little bit of a makeshift system for understanding how we exist through, as I would say, multiplanar beings. And this
Yeah.
this is to what I was this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, in getting started becoming a whole person again, is to get out of this or that dichotomy that was kind of a Chinese finger trap for the mind that has been given to us like a toy. Um, Now, it's one of the few times I will defer to theosophical literature, because I think they really got it right. Or they've come the closest so far. They organize it into a hierarchy. Again, anytime we use like verticality, it's an analogy so that we can understand something. But this vertical analogy that they refer to as the planes and the bodies.
Mhm.
And I cover it in detail in my book Etheric Magic, because it's essential to understanding things like energy work, things like spirit communication. Is that there's a hierarchy, which effectively is a working model for our ontological chain, right? The chain. So the spaces or the dimensions that I exist in simultaneously have communication, but it's not as straightforward as the way I'm communicating to you right now. Actually, a lot of it is pre-verbal, right? You don't
Mm.
really come into existence. You don't come into this world with language. You learn it, you acquire it. And so a lot of this stuff is pre-verbal. Now, there's we won't discuss them in any detail, but at the top, quote unquote, of this hierarchy is the spiritual or pneumatic aspect of oneself. Below that is the intellect, what we could call maybe the faculty of dianoia in the Platonic tradition, the
Mhm.
noetic self. And then underneath that is the emotional self, which is tied to the what we call the astral realm in theosophical verbiage, which is effectively the eye of the mind, the
Mm.
imagination, the imaginal faculty. And then underneath that is really the energetic or the subtle bodies, which serves as a link between the imaginal and the physical. Under
Right.
the bottom part is that is now, is it stratified like that vertically? No, it all interpenetrates each other. It's coterminous. It occupies the same space at the same time as everything else. But this is the way we lay it out so that we can understand it. And effectively, the highest part, that is you, where you can recognize you yourself, and not just that nameless I am observer, that is, let's say, in at the height of the spiritual realm, is the intellectual realm. The intellectual realm, even at the highest parts of the intellectual realm, you're still you to a greater or lesser extent. And so it's ultimately at the level of individualities, right? We talked about before how these things we communicate with are all sort of disembodied intelligences. So
Yeah.
they're individualities. And at that level of intellect, that's where spirit is broken out, sort of um uh refracted into multiple individualities. And so really, intellect to intellect is what communicates with one another. When you're talking to a disembodied intelligence, you're not actually seeing it in the room, you're not actually seeing it in the glass. What's happening is the intellectual part of your physical or
Mhm.
your spiritual your ontological architecture is communicating at the same level as something else, which is an individual intelligence. But human beings, we need an image, and so it filters. The way that we get the image is through the astral, imaginal, emotive. The eye of the mind will produce an image if you don't like, it'll use your available imagery to talk to you, to interface with this intelligence. In esoteric orders, we train ourselves to assimilate symbolic vocabularies so that it's not so personal. It's like you want to have more universal imagery than just like the junk in your head that comes out when you go to sleep at night.
Mhm.
So that's part of training in these orders, and that's really what you're communicating with in a lot of ways. Now, when these spirits want to affect the physical, the lowest they can get, and not even all of them, but the lowest they can really get, is the energetic, the subtle bodies, so they can affect. This is why so much of like poltergeist phenomenon has to do with electricity and lights and television, things like this. It's similar kind of wavelength, or I would say rarefication to something like electricity, and so on and so forth. And so that's a really helpful, I think, way to think
Totally.
about this stuff. And if anybody's interested in it, I really sort of very thoroughly explain this stuff, and I give visuals in Etheric Magic.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, and I do get a little bit into subtle bodies and soul vehicles and stuff into that talk as well, because partially for this exact theory reason,
Mhm.
like how can we be in all of these realms at the same time? Well, we have different layers of being that literally kind of correspond to these levels of reality. Like if you look at like the Eastern koshas model, it's like you have your what is it, Anandamaya kosha, which is like the bliss body, which is like akin to samadhi, oneness, being totally absorbed in the one, whatever you want to call it, all the way down to your physical body. And then you have, the other three in between that are also kind of unique. But yeah, they all make one whole. And I guess the other thing verticality does is it does kind of display that although they are codependent and co-arising, there is sort of still like an ontological superiority, right?
Mhm.
Like that top level bliss level corresponds to the highest level of reality, and the physical is. I think most people, most esotericists and people interested in this stuff would admit that the physical level is of a lower
Mhm.
purity and reality. Though there is this new age idea though that that's not true and the body is sacred and we should be like, just oh no, it is divine. My eroticism is divine. And I think some of that is bullshit. But anyway,
I agree.
um uh before we get off this topic of entities though, I won't divulge all of this because I don't know if you want me to say this publicly, but I am curious about your opinion on sort of dark entities because we have had a conversation and it was particularly in a juicy context of like these really debaucherous, maligned human beings like Epstein, right?
Mhm.
Who do these things that were like, how the fuck can a person do this?
Mhm.
Like what does a person believe in? What are a person's goals? Why would a person do these things? And of course, you can make all kinds of different arguments that are more and less schizo. But one of the real possibilities has to be that they are genuinely in touch with or working on behalf of something dark,
Mhm.
right? And most people would think of that as a sort of like convenient or maybe like intellectually lowbrow way to try to explain bad behavior, right? Like, oh, problem of evil, it's because there's some big bad spirit that's making. But I think there are good arguments to be made for that being a real possibility. And I get the sense that you kind of share that belief, but also you have the added kind of ammunition for your belief, which is like a lot of experience in this realm and a lot of contact with other people that you know well in this realm who probably also have a lot of stories to tell. So yeah, so where do you stand on this? What do you think or know to be true in terms of that whole conversation? Hello, my friend. Let us intermission briefly. Did you know that I have been diligently grinding out patron/member only content every week or close to it? The library is girthing well into the dozens at this point. Check that out in the members section, and like I said, much, much more. Or over on patreon.com/third eye drops. And if you do join in over there, you will also get access to a patron only Discord server, occasional live hangs, and more. Please do tickle that algorithm, like, sub, comment, etc. if you have not already. Unfortunately, I've noticed as of late, sometimes the algorithm just does not push this content nearly as hard as it does other times. So you will miss out if you are not subbed. Much love, and back to it. So yeah, so where do you stand on this? What do you think or know to be true in terms of that whole conversation?
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and it's a topic that is certainly worth broaching right now, and certainly for the last 100 years. I think many of us in this milieu have well, we haven't wrestled with it because there's a teaching. There's a teaching on it that you receive from esoteric orders. But I happen to have a clerical ordination in what we call a pre-Nicene church, and so part of that training was exorcism. And I also belong to an order of exorcists called the Elus
Well,
Coens. They've been around since the 1700s. So
Elus Coens. What does that come from?
it's effectively the entire title is uh, the Knight Masons Elect Priests.
Hmm.
And this was an organization started by a Mason in the 1700s named Martinez de Pasquale. That's
I've
quite,
heard that name.
yeah. It's I talk about him a lot in certain contexts. I'm not always. I'm a little reticent to talk about the fact that I'm a member of that. I was initiated into that order because it's not the kind of work that you can really talk much about. The
Hmm.
Golden Dawn, sure. There's a lot written about it. Freemasonry, sure, because there's very little actually going on in Freemasonry outside of just doing the rituals and planning dinner. But the Elus Coen,
Other than taking the world over, you mean for Satan?
yeah, we can barely
Yeah.
organize a bingo. I don't know, but the Elus Coen something very different. And so I've been a member. I've participated in exorcist ritual, and I've been exorcised myself. It's one of the first initiations you go through
Wow.
when you join the Elus Coen, is that you're effectively exorcised of anything. Now, Martina de Pasquale, who was the founder of this exorcistic order, he effectively reinterpreted certain parts of the Old Testament. Okay. And particularly centering around the fall. And Pasquale was a brilliant man, I think. And I actually did the audiobook for Michael Osborne's, M.R. Osborne's translation of what this exegesis, which is called the Treatise on the Reintegration of Beings.
Cool.
I recommend people either listen to the audiobook or get the book in any translation. Michael's is far and away the best right now, but get what you can get.
I'm going to take just that clip, by the way, and just put it on anything that I want an endorsement for.
Yeah, nobody knows who the hell I am. But what Pasquale says is, first of all, there are multiple falls. It wasn't just one. And to be honest with you, with the advent of these technologies, the black mirrors and what's coming with AI and the metaverse, we've bitten the apple again. We're headed into another fall. We're in the middle of it right now. So now Pasquale doesn't have anything to say about that. That's my own personal interjection. But certainly the other really important part that Pasquale talks about as a result of the fall, he basically conceives of humanity as an oversoul that is an extension from the divine, and that humanity was one soul called Adam, and that the fall shattered Adam like a mirror into a million different, at this point, probably over 8 billion different shards of consciousness, where we now are in this illusion of separateness from each other. But the consequence of the illusion is real, because we can't just, hey, I'm you, you're me. Sure, great. No, you don't have the same. You want to pay my medical bill? We're different. We're different people here. The rules don't. That kind of like airy fairy, non-dual bullshit. It ignores a lot of reality, and it's escapism. But yeah, of course, the best we can do, right? Of course, we're all one at the source, but the best we can do here is live in duality with unity in mind. Okay, that's the best you're going to get here. But the issue that Pasquale says is that when we shattered, we lost our divine sort of estate, meaning we lost certain powers of the soul. They don't come naturally to us anymore. We have to remember them. Develop. This is very much Platonic with anamnesis, the remembering of the soul and its divine estate, where it comes from. You can go as far back as the Orphic gold tablets are saying the same thing. Okay, those lamellae, those totem passes that the Orphic initiates used to wear, that assert to the gods upon the point of death, I am a child of earth and of starry heaven, and I am descended from heaven. I'm not descended from earth. I'm descended from heaven. You yourself know this. Give me to drink from the cool waters flowing from memory's fountain. Okay, memory's fountain. So Pasquale says that this forgetfulness was a result of the fall, but even more important, he says human beings effectively became pensive beings. That's the translation, pensive. He means thinking. But the way that he explains it is that we have become listeners, and we mistake the voice we are listening to for our own. On the one hand, we have the angelic prompting of the higher parts of our spiritual architecture. And then on the other hand, we have the demonic prompting, which is something pandering to the lowest parts of our nature and taking advantage, using the forgetfulness as leverage. Okay, and so this goes back to the agathodaimon, the kakodaimones. This is Neoplatonic. This is way beyond the idea of an angel on one shoulder, devil on the other. This is
very Zoroastrian, right? Because the Zoroastrian have this exact idea of like not just the daimon who's like the guiding spirit, which I talk about all the time on the channel.
The Fravashi.
They had the polar idea as well, that there was like the negative daimon, and these were sort of like the localized manifestations of like because they were dualists. They believed like Ahura Mazda, the good, and is it Ahriman?
Ahriman, or the long form is Angramanyu, but it gets shortened to Ahriman.
Yeah, so this is like your local almost hangers on from those two dualistic forces or something. So it's a very prevalent idea.
Well, and the thing is, the important thing there is not to mistake the idea that, oh, well, either an angel has me or a devil has me. It's not what it's about. You are the door. The only free will you have is which one you act on. So we do have free will to a degree in what we are which voice we are choosing to listen to, and in that way, both of those beings live in this world through us. Many, many people. There are whole esoteric orders that are commonly grouped together and referred to generically, poetically as the Black Lodge. There are many esoteric orders whose, just full disclosure, in the Golden Dawn, your job is to make communication and be led, become a vessel for your daimon, your personal daimon, which we call the higher divine genius, not the holy guardian angel, the higher divine genius. Okay, because genius was Thomas Taylor's word for the daimon. And this effectively allows the angelic aspect of our spiritual architecture to say to the persona who's been driving the car into a ditch for 40 some odd years, you're not behind the wheel anymore. But the thing is, we have to accept that. And the initiatory process is coming to divest yourself of control, but learning the right aspect of yourself to give that control to. Whereas on the other side of the fence, the Black Lodges, and you can act demonically without having to even be initiated in these groups. As a matter of fact, part of I think the job that they're doing is to actually just make it so that society as a rule acts in the capacity of a Black Lodge, is that you're making the opposite decision, the decision to let the demonic live in this world through me.
Yeah. And I think most people watching the channel know this, that there's a difference between daimonic and demonic, because in the first one, you said the goal is to essentially have your daimon, your higher guide, come through you, and then you're working on behalf of that thing as a vessel for the higher, basically. But demonic, colloquially, modernly means just the opposite of that. But this actually brings us to a good point, because so I guess this implies that you do think there are dark, malevolent beings.
As far as I'm concerned, I know for a fucking fact there are dark, malevolent beings.
So do you think, like, that sort of scenario that I put forth earlier of the Epsteins of the world, as these people of these people who are doing things where I think most people would have looked at the rumors and been like, this stuff's not real. Like the pizza and all this other shit, it can't be real. It's just it's too ridiculous. It's too just like cartoonishly bad. And then like and a lot of it is like imagination gone wild, but we know now a lot of it is not.
Right.
We know now a lot of it looks like it's exactly that. So like when you see this type of shit, do you actually go there, or do you think that human psychology is enough to explain a lot of it? Like where do you draw the line, if anywhere?
Human psychology is effectively spiritual.
This is true.
Right.
Yeah, under a certain POV. Yeah.
The term psyche, soul, is the root, etymological root of our word for psyche. So that, in my view, in what I would consider the magical worldview, certainly at this point, the soul the psychology is the spiritual dimension. It's in fact the conditioning of your psychology, of your soul, how it changes and what you become kind of triggered by, enslaved to, compelled by, what impulses you heed, which ones that, the level of discipline that you can cultivate, and therefore actual free will. The more disciplined you become, the more free will you can actually exercise in the material realm. Now, these things, the way that the soul changes depends on, that's a huge part of Neoplatonism. Plotinus says it himself, and in the Ennead, he says it in multiple places, but particularly the Tractate on the Soul, where he talks about, like, look, if the soul dives down in a willing plunge, and if it turns back quickly, all is well. It will not come to know effectively sin. However, if it stays too long and tarries, it can get stuck. It can get stuck, and the conditioning of the soul then is determines that post-mortem hell. It's not so much a place so much as it is a state. Now, I think the best example of what and the why, like, why would somebody do that? What's attractive about that? Well, yeah, of course you don't understand it because your soul hasn't reached that level of corruption. But ultimately, it becomes a power game. A lot of these people that are super rich, what can you really do with $1 billion? Like, what more can you spend?
Right.
It's not so much about that. It's so much as about, once you hit a certain income bracket, you now become a power player, which means
you become hungry for something else that is not just money, because it's like, yeah, I have more money than 99.9% of people, and then there's all these other people that I don't have more money than. So what can I have that they don't have? Would be one way that psychology could deteriorate.
Right. And I mean, ultimately, we're led in that direction. You think of it this way, like, people like you and me, and I don't mean to speak for you, but just average people, working people, we are basically pawns on the Monopoly board. We are the little houses. We're the little thing. But when you reach a certain level of income, and you've let people know that you're going to play ball, you now become a player. You're not on the board anymore. You're controlling what's on the board. And I think a lot of people want to buy into that. And then from there, I mean, think about it, right? Sexual assault, child abuse. It's all about, I mean, psychologically, it's all about control. So there's a power trip here. But what ultimately tempts us and brings us to those places? Well, what Pasquale would say, what exorcistic priests in the Christian tradition would say, is what is the voice in your head telling you? You've seen it before. This is what it means to have unsavory thoughts and things like this. Now,
I've never had that.
You've never had one. Okay.
Okay.
I know you are. But it's, it's kind of like this idea when Christ says to, when he talks about, covetousness, he says, look, you don't have to go and take your friend's wife, your neighbor's wife. If you've thought about it, you've already done it. So it's very much so that, and finally, I guess the last analogy that I will put on there, the one that I like very much, is Christ's being tempted in the desert by Satan. Satan effectively takes him up to the highest mountaintop, and he says, look out. And Christ looks out, and at the bottom, all of a sudden, At the bottom of this mountain, in the middle of the desert, where there's nothing, all of the nations of the world have somehow sprung up. Satan says, this is what I will give you. Those are his to give if you will kneel and bow to me and worship me. And he, obviously, Christ says, get thee behind me. And this guy, he basically says, the overarching message is no worldly institution is going to command me or my message. Now that's a very interesting thing, because even at the biblical level, like you're being tempted with the same stuff that these people are being tempted with and failing to withstand. They're being tempted with power, with control, with wealth, with nations. Okay. And what's really interesting is that Satan in that context, and in other contexts in the Old Testament and so on and so forth, if you read the book of Job, so on and so forth, it's Satan is the one who gets to say whether or not I will give you these. They're his to give. Now, in that sense, it's, it's talking about, it's speaking to, I don't mean to get too Gnostic on everybody, but it's certainly
Gnostic.
Well, it's certainly speaking to what we're talking about here. It's this temptation. And then ultimately, when you make that deal, when you say yes to those things, you're becoming the doorway for these things. It will just get more intense, like a whirlpool. You'll get sucked further and further down and away from who you really are. And the theory is, magically, right? The best we can come to is theory is that yes, these forces are inside you. Yes, of course. But they're also outside of you, right? It's that doctrine of the microcosm and the macrocosm. Is that, yes, of course, this is part of my psychology, but there is also an objective existential component to this as well. They are both working in tandem, and I am ultimately deciding which one I'm going to act in. It's kind of like in Harry Potter when he says, "Professor, is this all happening in my head? Is this real, or is this all happening in my head?" And he says, "Of course it's happening in your head, but why should that mean that it isn't real?" Now, I don't think that that's like some sort of pessimistic psychological kind of, what is reality? I think it has more to do with the fact that as within, so without, as above, so below, there are these forces in the ostensible cosmos, the actual phenomenal cosmos, and to the same extent, they're in us.
Yeah. I mean, it does make sense to a certain degree. I think that I also gravitate a little more toward, the standard kind of almost like Platonian way of looking at it, where nature and matter in and of itself is capable of producing a lot of what we perceive to be evil just through virtue of its nature, right? Just through the fact that it's coming, literally just the fact that beings have a modicum of free will, particularly humans, and things want to proliferate naturally, protect themselves, even if that means, the cost of others in the natural world. And also just the fact that death is guaranteed. Like we're guaranteed to come into existence, and everything is guaranteed to go out of existence. And I think just those factors alone do explain a lot of the problem of evil. And like Plotinus famously kind of equated matter with evil, right? Like evil is essentially matter, but it's not evil like it's wholly bad. It's just that these kinds of things can't really exist in non-material forms because they are not changing. Like, like the gods are and again, it depends who we're talking about. But I think broadishly, we can say that most of these Western esoteric traditions considered that like the gods, in air quotes, to be like these unchanging primordial factors of reality that it's like, they would probably say that they're not capable of evil. Like there's nothing about them that's evil. And this is sort of what Plato was arguing for in the Republic, right? Like that if you anthropomorphize the gods and depict them doing all of these things, you're going to completely get the wrong idea about what the gods really are. And then you start to get more of a glimpse of the esoteric idea of what that really means, with later Neoplatonists talking about like the henads and like, these more kind of difficult, exotic ideas to try to wrap your mind around what that even means. But yeah, so I don't know if there's a question in there, but I'm always like I'm open to everything you're saying, but I'm also worried about the idea of easily dismissing all the bad shit that happens as like the will of some evil thing out there, or Satan or whatever, because I think that's a slippery slope, but
Well,
it doesn't mean
these
I'm
are
not open
these
to it either.
these are ways also of like Satan itself. At least the way that I look at it is a way of it's a way of anthropomorphizing a tendency, which
Yeah.
is ultimately the antithesis of light and life. It is oblivion and darkness. And again, we can go back to Zoroaster, right? That's what Angra Mainyu was. When they were born of the same kind of father, Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, and when Ahura Mazda opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Ahriman looking at him with this vicious war face, rushing towards him, wanting to kill him.
Hmm.
And so it's
Damn.
yeah,
That's how the universe came into being.
well,
That's
I mean, it's a
kinda-
it's a myth, it's a
Yeah.
mythologization that a lot of people say it's an unresolved duality. I don't see it that way, and I make
Hmm.
a compelling case for that in my next book that's coming out called Esoteric Mythology. But we don't ever want to outsource. We don't ever want to outsource the locus of decision making, which is why we understand that like personal accountability and decision making, right? We are the ones ultimately choosing. If
Yeah.
you tell me to go like jump off a roof and I listen to you and you're just sitting there, you didn't do anything. You didn't put a gun on my head, you didn't put my arm behind my back and I go and do it. I'm at least in part responsible for the outcome. It's
Yeah.
not, so and not only that, but the soul is supposed to be dignified. Think of all of the options we have for choosing the good, all of the philosophy, all of the esoteric core of religion, all of the just the even to an extent secular humanism, to the effect that it's not some gross pantomime of actual ethics. All of that stuff, these are choices. These are things in front of us that we can choose to do. We're not compelled to do evil. We're not compelled to do things that willingly dissociate ourselves from the plight of others and the potentially violent or destructive or in some way unfair outcomes of the actions we choose. The force of evil that compels me is ultimately a product of my own confusion.
Mhm.
That's right. That's the whole thing. Plotinus does, in some parts of the Aeneid, he does talk about matter as if it were evil, but in other parts, he says, well, matter isn't evil in and of itself. He
Right.
says, right, because like Proclus was,
It's like the effect of it can be evil.
if it's followed to its own ends,
Yeah.
if the impulses of matter are followed to its own end, it eventuates in nothing because it doesn't have any actual life of its own. It's the antithesis of soul, right? It's spatially specific, it's dense, it's changing, it's inert. And soul is what enlivens things. It's the soul itself is not spatially specific. It doesn't have needs. And so when we come here and the soul is tethered to the body that has these needs, we're effectively, we get lost in the toss and turn and tumble of what our body's telling us, what our senses are telling us, and the actual nature of the soul. There's an antithetical relationship to some degree, but that doesn't mean that the soul just has to escape. The soul has to make the right choices. And the way you make the right choices, right, the Platonic paideia, is by waking up, remembering. Okay, remembering that I am a soul. We handle it the first dialogue in the curriculum of Iamblichus, the first Alcibiades, that very first one, it handles this question beautifully. Socrates brings Alcibiades to the aporetic state. He says, all these fancy people out there, these statesmen, they think they know, they don't know. You think you know and you don't know. I'm going to show you how and why. He brings Alcibiades into a state of epistemological ambiguity. Alcibiades says, what do I do from here? He says, know thyself. He said, what is self? He's like, soul. Know yourself as a soul before anything else. The soul part of you must take priority. It's the only way you will be able to make the right decisions.
Yeah.
And you will not be blameless. You will not be blameless just because you're asleep, just because you're still in a state of forgetfulness. Because don't forget, the Platonic dialogues, Plato's been famous for 2,500 years.
Yeah.
Okay, like at this point, if you're not tuned into what's going on between people like me, people like you, John Vervaeke, who are bigger than, if people aren't aware of this stuff, it's, I can't, you're not blameless.
Yeah. And I do get it to a degree, because it's like, it's hard to focus. It's hard to understand why you need to be into these things. I haven't read all the dialogues as much as I talk about them, but, and for people that don't know, like this dialogue you're talking about is the one that's about like knowledge, like what knowledge is, how to think of it, understand it, and that's sort of the point that Socrates ends on, and that you just laid out right there in the dialogue between him and this Alcibiades character. But I didn't know that. So we should say that there was this tradition of you had to, it was sort of an initiation to go through all the dialogues in a certain order. And what you were just pointing to is Iamblichus or Iamblichus, one of these famous Neoplatonist teachers, who was also this theurgist, magician, high priest type guy, who also was an Egyptian mysteries initiate, right? Like, I mean, that's how he portrays himself in the
he was part
on the mysteries.
It's like, so according to Clark and Dillon's translation, they did a beautiful introduction. He was likely part of an Emessene dynasty of priest kings, so they were effectively Syrian, effectively he came from a dynasty of priest kings, so he was doing this stuff.
Yes. So yeah, he developed this curriculum that you followed in a certain order, and part of it was going through these dialogues. But anyway, I wanted to push you a little further on something that you mentioned last time, which is like, because I remember it from the intro that I made, where you said something to the effect of, I wasn't even aware of what I wasn't aware of, or something like that. And you were saying that in the context of developing this sort of new way of understanding reality. And I think the implication was you do become aware of certain phenomena in reality. I'm curious exactly what you meant by that. And also, does any of it have to do with this kind of strain that we're on when it comes to like perceiving or encountering other intelligences? Or is it not quite that?
Well, it's all tied. It's all tied together, because it's like, how can if I want to get, if I'm outside of my house in the front and I want to get to my bedroom upstairs, I have to go through the front door. How can I get to, you know what I'm saying? It's like there's a logical sequence, a progression, a trajectory of unfoldment and expansion that the consciousness goes through that is not dependent on rote memorization, on taking in data and memorizing it and spitting it out. That's not what it's about. What it is about is it's about taking that critical ray, that analytical ray, and examining yourself with it, so that you can see in the first place, I have perceptual filters that are installed in me. We all do. Mm-hmm. This whole idea of what's cool. I fucking hate that word too. I hate that word, cool. When I hit 35 and I got sick of trying to be cool, it was one of the most freeing experiences of my life. I
want to get to that point.
Thank God. It's just that whole idea that there's this, it's another way of tying you to a different status quo. Yeah, sure, this one's about, I don't know, psychedelics and not arguing with people, but it's another status quo. It's neuro-linguistic programming. Things like this, very subtle ways that we have been entrained to kowtow and kneel to the status quo by being made to think that we're bucking against it. These are perceptual filters. The Cartesian sort of nominalism, scientific materialism, reductionist positivism, all of these fancy words to say that like science has got it. You know, the jury's, the verdict's in, and we don't have to look any further. So now you start making a priori assumptions, which means not, oh, I looked into it and I practiced it and I gave it time and I tried to understand it and I opened myself. Maybe I even kept a journal about my experiences. It's just, no, that doesn't exist because it can't, which is so anti quote unquote scientific. These are perceptual filters. There are so many of them. There is almost as many of them, as there are hairs in my beard. It's like
Right.
you have to keep seeing where the ego is hiding itself. Okay. And then from there, once you've learned basically, even this idea that everything is a lie can be turned into a new sort of, tail chasing excursion where there's some form of Hegelian dialectic where there's a prefabricated ideology for you to graft onto, because, the social programmers fully understand that you're in a state of limbo and human beings need to latch onto stuff. And we normally, when we find out what we're holding on to is a lie, we look in the opposite direction and go to whatever is 180 degrees in that way. So it's a false dichotomy. It's just this constant repetition. So there's that. And then once you can get past through that very initial thing, then you can start thinking about things like, what is a spirit? How do I get involved with them? To circle back to the first thing that you said,
Mm-hmm.
or the first question that you asked, how do I know that these things are true? Well, I don't 100% know. But the more I rid myself of automatically deferring to these perceptual filters, the more clarity I gain when I'm looking, the more insight I can have, the more efficacy and intuition and feeling I can obtain when I'm interacting with things like this. It's this whole process of, you see a lot. One of the reasons why I'm even, I came from behind the curtain in these esoteric orders is because I saw people engaging in magical practices, magical currents, and they were like riddled with these hardened perceptual filters. And what that effectively doing is profaning all of these things. It's destroying these systems because you are bringing your exoteric brain into esotericism. You're not understanding it, but because of the internet, you're able to appropriate the aesthetic,
right?
And now what are you're making a mess. So could you have spirit contact via like a Ouija board or a grimoire, let's say, if you've not done a lot of this work on yourself? Sure. Look at Aleister Crowley. He's a great example of how you can obtain, magical efficacy and still kind of be a POS. But the thing is, let's quote the Chaldean oracles here. Those, those dog-faced demons ever dragging down the soul who never show true form to mortal gaze. They're going to have a field day with you eventually.
Yeah, man. Wow. The edgelording, the gothy edgelording aesthetic that can come with this stuff is one of those people, or one of those things that I can see how it both attracts and repels people, right? Because it's sort of like a next logical step to like being into metal or something, right? Like
exactly.
you could think of it that way. But then when you actually do read something like, I don't know, something like the Corpus Hermeticum, you see a very large gulf between that kind of aesthetic and what's really being said in these texts that are supposed to be the progenitors of these traditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you get the idea that it's somewhere this sort of like spooky black cloak, sword wielding stuff feels like it kind of went off track from the original point, which was supposed to be like what we were talking about in the beginning, is essentially like the high magic of making yourself a vessel for like the higher to work through you on this planet. And there comes this idea that, no, I can sort of elevate the ego through these practices. I can manifest things, in a way that yeah, it's become very popular in the zeitgeist, but it sounds to me more like an inversion of what was really being meant by these, air quotes, hermetic principles that aren't even
Yeah.
really ancient anyway. But yeah. So I mean, I want to go. There's a couple different directions my brain is sort of trying to choose to go in here, but let's stick to this one for now.
Okay.
When you really do have this goal in mind, and you really are interested in this, mysterious art of theurgy that people like Iamblichus were doing, this mysterious technique that translates to something like God working or working with divinity. What really happens versus like the knee jerk sort of exoteric perception that you're talking about that most people
This is good.
project onto these things? Because we can look at something like On the Mysteries by Iamblichus, who does talk about like
Yeah.
luminous manifestations, essentially what today we would call downloads, divine revelations, divinatory insights, all of this kind of stuff. It does sound like there is really something appearing. Like this is something I really wanted to make sure of actually when I was giving this talk, because I didn't want to make it sound like something was physically appearing if that's not what he's saying. If he's saying this is like a mind's eye visionary thing, I don't want to pretend like it means an orb's going to manifest.
Yeah.
But there are various points where he says these things can be so grand that they like block out the moon and sky and stuff like that. So I mean, it sounds pretty literal. So yeah, I could feel you wanting to speak. So yeah.
Well, I mean, the first thing that I want to say is that this is probably one of the top 3 questions anyone has ever fucking asked me, and I don't know why any people don't ask that question more often. So it's just excellent that we were turning it to that focus. The first thing that I want to say, I'm gonna put a pin in this idea of whether theurgic appearance is 100% physical or if it happens in the mind of the eye, because Iamblichus does say exactly what's happening. Before that, I want to say that which is kind of a way of leading us out of what we were just talking about and towards the subject. One of the perceptual filters a lot of people have is very much so spirituality. They think they know what spirituality is supposed to look like. They think they understand what the inevitable product is. And what they're really doing is just projecting their subconscious, which has been informed by media. It's been informed by movies and Oprah's Super Soul Sunday and all of this junk. BS, frankly, that you got to be this super calm and that is a Western bastardization, a fundamental misunderstanding of Eastern tropes, which is ultimately a product of us Westerners culturally exoticizing, being bored with what we have. So we got to go someplace else, something foreign and exotic to go and find spirituality. Okay. And then we go and we don't understand it. And we come back here and we develop ideas like the misinterpretation of the Pali canons, anatma as no soul. Right. It has nothing to do with no soul. It's just anything you can point to is not your soul. So you have avidya, wrong view, when you are trying to define the soul by anything. This is almost an apophatic way of approaching the soul. And Westerners say, there's no soul. There's no soul, because this secular humanist atheism has poured like an oil spill into everything. That's a perceptual filter. This idea that you got to be just chill. I'm chill, man. Spirituality chills you out. First of all, whether you look at Iamblichus, you're looking at Buddha, you're looking at Christ, these are people who walked away from riches to go and study spirit in the desert. They had no chill. Can you do that? Can you do that? Can you leave everything right now and actually go to the desert if you're
Apparently
rich?
Not.
You know what I'm saying? Like anybody.
Actually, no, I did just go to Contact in the desert. Granted, it wasn't a giant resort, but
right. But and that's the thing, like it's this idea that we have. And why does that matter? It matters because it ties into what we're talking about with the persona.
Yeah,
you were given a bag of bullshit in life, trauma, baggage, right? That's like the fool on the tarot card. In the traditional Rider-Waite symbolism, he's got a rucksack with with a bag in it. And he's about to walk off a cliff. Okay, that's the fool. key 0. All right. Now, the next card is the magician. The magician's got all of his magical tools laid out on the table, and he's in this position, bridging, uniting the above and the below. And there's kind of this saying that we have, and it's poetic, but your magical tools are in that bag. Your magic is in your baggage. So when you have this contact, true contact with what we call the higher divine genius, the daimon, you don't become this perfect, peaceful little calm lamb. It uses the raw material of you, except now instead of going and getting wasted with all of this, going and doing something, it is channeling all of your very unique gestures, traits, abilities, limitations. It is channeling those very intensely towards a productive end, an end that is ultimately your soul's purpose being here. The agreement you made on the other side. You can't figure that out. You cannot figure that out. I don't care how many people come out of the woodwork. Well, I've got a YouTube channel and I wear mala beads, and and so I think, I don't give a shit what you think. The tradition, which ultimately informs the experiences adepts have, shows us, not just these adepts who read a couple of books and now decided, well, I've had the initiation because Hecate came to me in a dream. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about systematic training, a transmission of lineage, of teaching. It's not about the paper. It's about I learned from a master, and now my job is to teach somebody else. That form of transmission has always, in all sectors, told us that you're not going anywhere. It's just whether or not you want to continue to ruin your life by not knowing what to do with your baggage, or giving it up to the higher and saying, take the wheel. And that call, that cry for help, that divestiture, that acknowledgement, that cosmic apology, I was wrong. I don't know what I'm doing. That fire is what we call in the philosophical, the Platonic tradition, eros. And the hotter that is, the more you scream out like a baby in its crib in the dark, an infant of the night screaming for its parent. The more sincere that is, the more powerful the change is going to come. That is like it's absolutely not necessary for contact with the daimon, is that horrific pain and the existential understanding, the apology.
Yeah.
The apology that comes in, the true apology that comes in. That's effectively what has to take place right before that. Aporia, the aporetic state. I don't know. I'm struggling with this stuff, and I don't know what I think I believe anymore. So then the last thing that I'll add, we talk about Iamblichus. Iamblichus, and this goes back to what you were saying about bringing up in your presentation, which I think is fantastic. This is why I love talking to you, because you're out in that world that I'm not in. I'm not out in, I know a lot of guys. Pascal Michael is a good friend of mine. I love him to death.
Yeah, he was there.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I love him. I see him every time I go to London. He came to we had him at the Hermeticism Symposium in Egypt. All these great guys, Carl Hayden Smith, all out there in this space that I'm not a part of. But you specifically are bringing the Platonic stuff into it, which is really, really important. And it's just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Hermetic stuff. And hopefully you and I will get into that together, maybe down the line. But
I would like to.
But the key component there is that the imaginal faculty that receives. A lot of us think of imagination and we think of fantasy. We think of daydream. It's not real. But in religious texts and spiritual texts of the ancient world, they're not really talking about it in that way. That's why Henry Corbin, the religious scholar, he coined that phrase, imaginal faculty, instead of the imagination, because the imagination has a stigma to it that is not appropriate for the way the texts he was translating are discussing the eye of the mind, the image-making faculty, because it's the way that they talk about it in spiritual traditions is not that it's this, mental simulacrum thing. It's not just an organ of active creation. It's an organ of spiritual perception. It receives. If you train it and you understand it, the imaginal faculty is what is receiving the information that you cannot physically see.
And it's equally real to the physical, but just in a different quality. And It's so weird and synchronistic that you brought this up, dude, because I was on a panel with Pascal Michael, and this exact thing came up. Henri Corbin, the Imaginal, and he made a point about the Imaginal in relation to psychedelic states. But I won't get super deep into it right now because it's going to derail what we're talking about. But yeah, just very, very weird synchronicity that you brought this up. But yeah, okay. Yeah, so continue on this train. I think you might be getting to the other part of the initial question.
Yeah, Iamblichus effectively says that the more we purify the energetic body, the more our imaginal faculty becomes an organ of perception rather than mere distraction. Okay, so what does this look like, this purification? This purification is anamnesis. It is the removal. We talk about purification, catharsis. We're not talking about, oh, he's been a naughty boy or I'm unclean with sin. Purification, in the sense, is the removal of the obstructions to your soul's memory, that it is akin. It is akin to the gods. The issue many people in the modern day have is that they understand that intellectually, and then they self-deify, and now you're screwed. You're gonna have a lot of work to come back and get out of that. It is a removal of obstructions. How do you do this? Prayer, humility, offering. Okay, certain forms of breath work, certain forms of divination. Now, I'm not talking about tarot. I'm not even talking about astrology. He had his own methods, like you say. Some of them we can't reconstruct them, but he had them. Okay, and one of those methods of divination was mantia, was being ridden by the god. Okay, is having that kind of ecstasis.
Divine madness, as it's usually translated.
Exactly, divine madness, where ecstasis. I stand outside of myself. It's an out of body experience. Quite
where ecstasy comes from.
Exactly. It doesn't mean it feels real good. It means I left my body. He says this. I'm going to paraphrase from Finnemore's translation of De Anima. It's so if you had, he doesn't really say it in these terms on the Mysteries. He says, although he talks about it at length, but in these particular terms, he discusses it in De Anima, which is on the soul. Okay, Finnemore, I'm going to just paraphrase. He says, when you have purified the spiritual vehicle, the energy bodies, you are more fit. The word is epitidiotis. Your fitness, your receptivity has been increased. Now, that receptivity allows the gods to appear to you. And this is what we were talking about earlier, theurgic appearance. But where do they appear? Iamblichus says the mind and attention follow what happens because they are not seized by the gods. Okay. But the fantasticon, fantasia, the imaginal faculty, is seized by the gods and is raised above what is ordinarily human. Now, for anybody that's had these experiences, many of us who are practitioners in magic, vision work, so on and so forth, psychism, you've had that experience. I had that experience like 60 times before I even knew who Iamblichus was. You have an image in your imaginal faculty and you're trying to commune with it. You're trying to invoke the specific entity, power, being, whatever it is that you want to commune with. You're trying to call it in and it don't work, and you're second guessing yourself, and am I making this? And then finally one day, with enough practice, enough focus, that thing comes to life. And it is existentially jarring when you realize yourself to no longer be in control or creating this, but you are observing what is said. It attains a species of autonomy that is unpredictable and scary at first. Okay.
Yeah.
This is what Iamblichus was talking about when he says, the mind and attention follow what happens because they are not seized. That is literally you being the observer to the deity seizing what you have created in your imagination. And now I got this. Now I'm going to commune. I mean, I'm getting chills just talking about it. It's he's quite clear that a lot of this stuff, it does happen there, but there are other states of union, enosis, that that transcend the observer and observed sort of dichotomy. There is a union that happens in actuality that transcends theurgic appearance, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was so passionately and beautifully said. I do have a question because everything you just said sounds very familiar to me, particularly under the context of like strong altered state experiences I've had,
Mm.
where it's I think that there is this desire from a lot of people to want to see something in physical space with other people. Even if it is like an elevated state of consciousness, this shared perception of like we are all seeing this together, right?
Mhm.
Like we are all seeing this thing in front of us. Like it's not disputable. Um but in that quote that you gave, it implies that there's a kind of state of experiencing that is, what did you say, above the normal? Like above normal
It is
perception?
raised up above. It is elevated above what is ordinarily human, is the way he puts it.
Yeah, okay. So that would imply clearly it's more than just normal sensory perception. And we already know from this POV that like sense perception is like the bottom. It's literally the cave. Like your sense perception is you are in Plato's cave, and if you have a naive realist perception of reality, you're looking at shadows on the cave wall and you haven't even like begun the journey out. You haven't even turned around to see what's shining the shadows on the wall.
Mhm.
So this idea of needing to get into these higher states of not even just cognition, but like experience above your own personal cognition is implied there. And it's so what I'm trying to get at is I get what you're saying from that perspective of like theomania, divine madness, and having the consciousness seized by a higher being. But also, he talks literally about certain kinds of lights appearing and certain kinds of,
Mhm.
qualities manifesting.
Mhm.
So how do those two things square, if you even have an answer to that?
Well, the thing is that in my mind's eye, the main language, when before I even really knew any of this stuff, the main ways that I would, if you see behind me, these are all my journals from over the years of
Mm,
keeping magical records and things like this throughout initiation. The main ways in which things would appear to me had to do with light, color, and geometry. That's the main way things would appear. There's a kind of there's almost like this fish scale quality to it, or
mm.
like if for anybody that's familiar with things like tiger's eye, I think they call it like chatoyancy. This and you can
I've never heard of that.
look that word up. It's this strange glimmer, this reflective quality that is really I would say it's a staple. It's certainly like it's constant in that kind of reception. So
Mm,
light right there already, right? Because it's like what am I actually seeing? What is it that's doing the seeing? There particularly when these things become enlivened in the way that I was talking about. And don't forget, he doesn't say the consciousness is seized, the imaginal is seized, the fantasticon or the fantasia, the imagination is seized. It achieves a level of autonomy. So there's still a component of you that is there to witness what is going on. And now there's two different variations of this, and this can get confusing. But again, for anybody that finds what I am able to discuss here in this time frame, in this state of mind, insufficient, please see my book Etheric Magic, because I had a lot of time to really be precise about it. There are two types of this visualization. There is the astral or imaginal, okay, that has very much to do with shape, form, light, color, images of people, of animals, of rocks, and all these things. And then on the other hand, there is a type of what I refer to it as etheric sight, which is seeing the energetic bodies of certain beings, right? For instance, Iamblichus says in On the Mysteries, daimones
yeah.
have etheric bodies. They have bodies made of atmosphere or ether. And these types of things you can see in a room when you've done an invocation. And that is, as Stephen Skinner put it very perfectly, but I would agree 100%. It's a champagne sparkle in the air.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is evidence of some sort of etheric presence much of the time. Though if you shut the lights off and practice this site, actually in total darkness, you will be more apt to see all of the lights. We are swimming in these lights, these etheric lights. So those are different from each other. They're similar, but they're different. Now, finally, the synthesis of the two is magic. It's why in the Golden Dawn you go around, you draw pentagrams in the corridors, and upright pentagrams, right? The Pythagorean pentagrams, not the inverted ones, the bestial ones. But you do that and you visualize them. You visualize angelic forms in the corridors. It kind of had this effect where it was like, I'm dating myself, but like the Karate Kid. The guy goes to learn Kung Fu. Instead, he's waxing this guy's car.
Karate, man. Come on.
Yeah, or whatever it is. Karate. He said he's painting his fence and he's waxing his car. What he doesn't realize is that he's learning how to like block and strike.
Right.
He has no idea. It's this very similar concept in the Golden Dawn.
And that's why all the UFC fighters train like that now.
Yeah, they wash cars.
Yeah.
But it's a similar concept where you don't know that you're actually training these faculties. And I'll describe the way that it happened to me is after about 2 years of doing it consistently, almost every single day, of visualizing this stuff, using breath work, very intentionally tracing it out with my hand to guide my vision. I just saw it in the room. And it was like, wait a minute. Like, I'm not trying to do this. I'm not like, it's there.
You're talking LBRP?
Yeah. That was the first time. And after that, many other sort of things happen. And what I didn't realize before is that I had seen it in like things like apparitions. It was the same thing. And we call that overlay. It's the imaginal giving you an image for something that you're intuiting, an intelligence that you have now come into awareness of that does not have a physical body. And you're overlaying that into the three-dimensional space. Now, my experience of that phenomenology is that I don't see those things as three-dimensional. They're clearly in the room, but there's a two-dimensional quality to them. But they can walk around the room. I can, like in the case of a pentagram, I can pass my hand through it. And it's not something I have to try to do anymore. So there's a couple of different types of ways that you will experience this, and as you practice.
So it's like unlocking a sort of faculty, like maybe like a vestigial or unawakened or like astral phantom limb type thing.
That's the way I talk about it in the book, actually, because it requires. If all of a sudden I realize I have another arm behind my right, it's probably dead. And I need to wiggle the fingers, wake it up, learn how to use it, develop, dexterity with it.
Yeah. 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 And, when you were talking before about the idea, it's funny because I smiled a couple of times, depending on the edit, people might be able to see it, but because you actually just brought things up that I had written down as ideas of things to talk about. And one of these ideas was the importance of purification, and like, why is it in every single esoteric tradition, whether it's Western esotericism, Eastern, shamanic, like with the dieta, there's always some kind of purification process that one has to go through. And you did a pretty good job of explaining why one needs to do that. But even in a more like simplistic, like meditative kind of sort of capacity, you kind of notice that there's just this like gunk that accumulates. Like there's like just mind gunk. I think Plotinus talks about like needing to remove the stains of the world or the outside world or something
miasma.
Like that.
Miasma.
Yeah,
it's
we should talk about
purity.
We should talk about that. We should talk about miasma, because that is a lost concept that I don't think should be lost. Like, I think we probably, just like everything, we probably went too far with it or applied certain things to it that don't apply. Mm-hmm. But I think miasma absolutely still explains a lot of things. And arguably, I think you can experience what it's like to be afflicted with it, or like seriously, just like what I'm talking about, feel like you have just these weird psychical stains on you that take a while to clear, and you sort of like feel it when the chatter has stopped, when the calmness sets in. For me, these like kind of swirling lights appear in my mind's eye, and I always like wonder what the fuck they are, or if they might be related to what we were just talking about.
That's what, but that's what I'm talking about. Light and geometry.
Yeah.
The swirl and light. Like that's exactly what I'm talking about. And there is a big part of living a magical life and like that lifestyle of being an initiatory order, especially now for, a decade or so or more, is this daily sort of spiritual hygienic routine, which seeks to effectively limit the accumulation of what Plotinus and others would call miasmic, like a stain, impurities. And this is a consequence. There's an etheric, there's an energetic, right? And for anybody that doesn't realize it, like the idea of having an energy body is not new agey. These, as Michael put it, sages from the 1st and 2nd and 3rd and 4th century, they were talking about it in terms of the avgoedi soma, the luminous body, or the okima pneumatikon, which is the spiritual vehicle. Okay, so they were talking about it back then, and really all theurgy, this application of magical techniques and technologies to the purification, elevation, and illumination of the soul, all theurgy to them really was, in most ways, theurgy of the luminous body. So the soul, in its confused state, in its, what the Theosophists would call the state of somnambulism, sleepwalking. The soul is sleepwalking through life, and the persona is kind of the dream of reality that we're having. In that somnambulistic state, that state of confusion, the soul becomes marred and weighed down. Okay, and this can be an existential ennui. This can be depression. This can be hopelessness, doubt. This kind of stuff is how it can manifest psychically. Physically, it can manifest, at the more extreme sides of it is actual disease, as brain fog, so on and so forth. But there is an etheric quality. There's an etheric consequence. The etheric body will take on a miasma, which is kind of like the stain. And therefore, right, we talked about if you want to ascend, if you want to achieve something in theurgy, you got to keep that luminous body clean. Okay. But ultimately, it's not a product of any like sin so much as it is just state of confusion.
Yeah.
Which is actually
a natural result of like existing in this world.
That's a very good way to put it, actually. Yes, 100%. And now the key is to purify it. They used, water. They use a substance called the kernips, right? It's effectively consecrated water to affect some of that, but also prayer and humility and offering and sort of that stuff to the celestial gods. So yeah, miasmic purity would be something that you would, or miasmic, let's say the miasmic taint, the pollution.
Come on, man.
It will.
Come on. I got it. I got a miasmic taint right now, sitting here for an hour and 30 minutes.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
but that miasmic pollution, you can find ways of, you'll find an acknowledgement of its existence and ways to mitigate it and purify it. Like in my experience, the best examples that are extant today are in things like Qigong and Tai Chi, but Qigong especially, which is why, again, Etheric Magic is a book taking those energy work practices from the East and firmly planting them in the Western milieu.
And there's also greater and lesser miasma, right? Like
yes.
I'm trying to like remember. Yeah, you want to unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so there, the thing about, particularly in theurgy and all of this kind of stuff, like the planes and the bodies that I was talking about before, the intellective, the emotional. So there's the higher intellect and the lower intellect. There's the higher astral and the lower astral. There's the higher physical and the lower physical. So there's all these stratifications to show change of state. and that exists obviously in miasmic pollution as well. I would say that miasmic pollution at the lower levels is something that can be addressed with something like Kernips. Okay, miasmic at the higher levels is going to be, there's going to be much more of a purificatory formula or praxis, is sort of a program of specifically of prayer and things of that nature, and
Probably
offering.
like fasting, abstinence, like
Exactly.
So I just pulled this up because I was
Diet.
curious how they define lesser and greater miasma. And keep in mind, this is just what comes up right away. So this isn't like the final word on it. It's just a summary. So lesser miasma is kind of like what we were saying before: unintentional everyday pollutants or minor disruptions to the natural order. Examples being so this is an interesting thing too, where I don't know if I necessarily agree with things like there's actually a story about Iamblichus avoiding a certain route, right, to like avoid where a dead body had been, because there are ideas like being near death or dead bodies or sickness. These are kinds of miasma. Um, and just like you said, this is cleansed. Usually, this is cleansed by washing it away using Kernips, like a purified kind of salt, holy water. But then there's greater miasma, which is deep cosmological or willful transgressions against natural, social, and sacred boundaries. So this would be like homicide. I've never heard. This is a great name for a metal band. Blood guilt, the most severe term, the most severe form. Oh man, I don't even want to say this next word. I would have to bleep myself out. Breaking major oaths or defiling sacred altars or sanctuaries. When this requires intensive ritual expiation,
Right.
time, exile in the case of murder, and active efforts to atone or correct one's actions.
Yeah, and that right there, right? That miasmic pollution, the greater miasma, that is effectively because you're led from the lesser to the greater, and that is when you have now come into, whether willing or no, you've come into being that vessel for what we call in this, right? Let's just stay in this vernacular, the kakodaimones, the impure spirits now have a hold of you to the point where you're defiling an altar.
Right.
You're committing homicide. These are not crimes of like you put earlier, right? I walked past the cemetery. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it. This is like there's a premeditation, there's a consciousness behind that ultimately you are responsible for.
Right.
And the fact that you were okay with it, the fact that your soul said yes to this, immediately means like you got work to do. Because it's not enough to say I'm sorry and to regret things. You need to, it's like, okay, so I won't go too deep into this because I'm thinking about how miasmic your taint is right now. But but
hey, you just need some dude. The combination of miasmic taint and nips being in the word of the thing that cleanses it. That's a little too much for me.
Yeah, but there's a word that everybody hates, and again, it's along with purity. It's called repentance.
Mm-hmm.
Repent, and thou shalt be saved, right? Repent, for the kingdom is at hand. People think of beating chests and groveling on their knees, crying, begging for forgiveness, deep regret. Or some people, if you're Catholic, think, okay, you're going to do 10 Hail Marys, you're going to do 3 Our Fathers. They dole these things out like prescription medicine. Effectively, those are both the wrong way of looking at it, because when you look at the word repentance, in the original Greek of the New Testament, the word is metanoia.
Oh, really?
Which means change your mind. But it's not.
Yeah.
It's not. It's not necessarily like think differently. We would conceive of a metanoia, repentance, as a change of heart, a total renovation of the way we look at the world. That is what you need when you have willfully accumulated the greater miasma, and you've made a pact with the kakodaimonas, willingly or no, to perpetrate, to embody evil in this world, to embody the dark force of oblivion and anti-light, anti-life. When you've willingly done that, you must achieve true metanoia. You must have a change of heart. And so these are the ways some of these techniques are geared towards. We don't know that they're going to work. It's not a prescription. It's not if you check every box. Okay, you were in exile, you dieted, you prayed. If you did not have that metanoia, you still have you still need to work.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I didn't know that repentance was literally metanoia.
Literally.
Which implies like it's a kind of knowing. It's like a kind of knowledge that like you said is like ontologically reorienting. It makes you understand, like you're understanding something differently and in a broader way than you did before. So it's almost like an initiation in a way. Like it's having a new knowledge that you didn't possess before.
To understand the New Testament Gospels in the light of Platonism and having any facility with Greek, you understand that it is the capstone of the Western mystery tradition.
Wow.
Because think about it. Think of how many people have gotten so many different fucking words wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and like made that their whole life.
And truthfully, this is one of the reasons I personally feel like kind of repelled from mainstream religion, because I feel like it's gone so astray that like no one really has the real answer of what was being done here. But to your point, even knowing like scattered amounts of Greek words, when you hear like that, you know, that for most of people that may not know, like the Septuagint, like the oldest Bibles that we have are actually in Greek, at least New Testament Bibles. And when you hear the words that are being used, you're hearing all the same words that are being used in like the Western esoteric tradition.
Yeah.
Like, and Hermeticism, like you're hearing logos, you're hearing nous, you're hearing like all of these same things. And clearly you're not understanding the context if you don't have this like Hellenic backdrop of wisdom to draw from. And of course, nobody does right now. No one, unless you're like a weirdo like us, and I use us very loosely because I'm way less initiated into it than you are, or you're like a classicist, or you know, but most of them are looking at it as more of like a cultural sort of academic sort of lens, though I'm sure many of them harbor, you know, philosophical and spiritual interest in these things as well. But yeah, it's just so far off course from where it started that it's like just so it like repels me, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
But that's a personal
and
problem.
there's no need, like the whole thing is that like the canonical gospels in Greek themselves are not mainstream. What's mainstream is the theological dogma behind them, because they can't be mainstream if the people in the mainstream don't fucking understand them. There's no way. It's like, this show's real popular, except nobody's watching it. You know, that you know, so that's the whole thing. It's to me, that's part of the whole game that's being played is like, I'm going to make you so sick of this that you're never going to look at it by placing another perceptual filter between you and the thing itself, which is dogma, which is institutional, you know, and that's the whole thing. But the esoteric tradition of the West, particularly the initiatory tradition as we receive it from the Golden Dawn, so on and so forth, has a preoccupation with the reinvestiture of the proper understanding of the Gospels of Christ, because that is the capstone of the entire tradition.
So what are they really about, if you had to try to put it into words?
Well, think about what it would look like if the theurgic project were truly accomplished. Truly accomplished. What would the theurgic project really look like? Now, even the Greeks, who hadn't necessarily done it, knew about it, had done aspects of it, had achieved, even they couldn't have anticipated what a person or a being who had achieved the theurgical union, what they would say. Because almost everything that comes out of the mouth of Christ is nonsensical to people who were living in a pre-Christian world. I mean, the Greeks...
Sorry,
go ahead.
Sorry to derail you, but just in case, again, we've talked about this already in the conversation, but just in case people are still like, their brain is a little scrambly when you say theurgic, just simplify the definition for people in this context.
The union of human beings with not a god, the God. Okay, which the Greeks believed in. It was called henotheism, or ultimate monotheism. The Egyptians were henotheists, ultimate monotheists. They didn't deny the existence of a plurality of God, but they believed them to be ontologically lower than the one God that birthed all of them. If you have any, I go to great pains in my controversial book, A Formless Fire. That was my first book. I'm pulling from things as old as the coffin texts of ancient Egypt to show their myth of the one God who created all the other gods.
In one of the Upanishads, it says something similar to like gods are essentially like appendages, or like they're like they're like appendages of the God, or something like that.
That's a really good way to put it. I use that analogy all the time, right? Because I'm used to working with the tree of life and over my anatomy. It's like, okay, if let's say my microcosmic sort of, let's just say that the intellect is sort of the guy in the cockpit, the God in the cockpit. And my brain says to myself, we are thirsty. Does the brain crawl seep out of my ear and crawl and like some sort of amorphous blob towards the glass of water? No, it uses the arm, which uses the hand to grasp the cup and bring it to my mouth. This is why we have to work with that ultimate deity apophatically, because it's constantly using discrete permutations or individuations of itself that are not it in its totality. So appendage, I think, is a great term for that kind of thing. But it's all part of the same. It's all unified. It's part of the same body. But it's about what do you want to embody? Do I want to embody an appendage, or do I want to embody the thing? And it turns out that when the theurgic operation actually happens, and the God above God, let's say, the truth, the absolute comes down, the impersonal God is made personal. What it has to say is, as luck would have it, quite controversial. And so, that's why it's so incredibly important, because it is effectively the first time in recorded history, at least, that a group of people, like maybe, I don't personally, and this is going to set a lot of people off, but so be it. Personally, I don't need Jesus to have existed historically. Do I think in my heart that he did? Sure. But I don't need that to be the case.
Right.
Because everything that is written in these Gospels is 110% valid, which leads me to believe that there were a group of people, perhaps, who had found the way to effectively do this. And that is what ultimately early Christianity was before it became sold out and perverted.
But there was a big dichotomy, because there were many of these teachers were living in a time where Christianity was starting to blossom, right? And many of them rejected it very strongly. There was very famously, the Platonists got kicked out of Athens, and they had to kind of go into hiding in Turkey or whatever. Nobody really knows what happened to them. But would you say that that's because it's sort of like the state run kind of persona of the thing rather than the truth of the thing? Or
I mean, well, because here's the thing, when a religion gets state sponsorship, you've gone Coca-Cola, it's not this little thing anymore. And so again, what has happened at that point, and I get it, there's no way I could put myself in their shoes where they brokered a deal with the emperor of the known world because they were being fed to fucking lions for entertainment. Children. Okay, first of all, when people say Christians don't understand suffering, as a demographic, maybe not modern ones do, but the ones who gave their blood for centuries, for fun, for entertainment, were eaten alive. I understand why you would make that deal. However, you are doing the opposite of what Jesus did when he was tempted with all the nations at the mountain. You are saying, yes, to the nations. You're saying, yes, I bend the knee just because it's hard. Christ went to his cross willingly.
So do you? I don't think you take more. Well, I guess it's a shortfall of the word Gnostic. But I was going to say I didn't think you took a very Gnostic stance. But I think in one sense you probably do, but just probably not in the evil demiurge kind of way.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'll say this as an aside to you, but I went on. I was on the Ladder Journeys in Platonic Mysticism podcast. Is my second time today. I went on. Danielle Lane, Dr. Danielle Lane hosts it. Excellent podcast. Me, her, and Greg Shaw did a little book club reading.
Oh, fabulous!
Of the Critias today. Okay.
Oh, cool.
A lot of people skip over the Critias. I know that I had skimmed it once, and I'm like, this is weird. We reread it for a book club just because none of us had looked at it in a while, and
the dialogue that has to do with Atlantis, friends.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's part of this 3-part arc of the Republic happens on one day, then the next day the Timaeus happens, which is the first mention of Atlantis, and then the Critias happens right after the Timaeus, directly into it. Like Timaeus is finishing up his speech in the beginning of the Critias, and then Critias tells us all about Atlantis, whereas we just got a little taste of it in the previous one.
But it's presented before, right?
No, it happens after.
I mean, but in the actual book itself, isn't it usually Critias first and then?
Well, not in the. I think you're talking about the Stephanos numbering, right? I think that would be the case there, but I think I'm pretty sure that that's an approximation of the accepted sort of chronology. Not necessarily that the dialogues were supposed to have taken place in, but when they were written. Which is why I think a lot of times you'll see Timaeus and Republic towards the end of a book or something like that. But I'm not 100% sure how the Stephanos numbers lay out the chronology of the Platonic dialogues. But it's in the beginning of it, it's Timaeus saying, "Wow, that was great. Thanks for letting me tell that story, gang." And then Critias goes on, and he's called on to elaborate on the Atlantean piece. Effectively, what he gives is this. Whereas the Timaeus talks about how the creative intellect of the absolute sort of came into creation mode and what happened after that. Critias talks about how Poseidon, right, who Proclus would have considered that medial demiurge. Zeus is the highest, Poseidon is the middle, and Hades is the sublunar demiurge, or the terrestrial demiurge. Poseidon actually creates his own sort of perverted version of the cosmic scheme, and it's a myth of inversion. It effectively inverts everything that happens in the Timaeus. And I don't know. I'm probably not the first person to see that, but certainly I think I introduced it to this group of scholars, and it was a great conversation because of that, and it did lean very Gnostic. Now, this is the problem that Plotinus had with the Gnostics, right? Because he effectively lived like them. He was an ascetic. He was world denying.
For people that don't know, in his collected teachings, the Enneads, there's a section called "Against the Gnostics." Like, so he is like commenting against these Gnostics and like why they're wrong, essentially.
Yeah, and it's likely that he was speaking about the Sethians in particular, because they're the really hard-lined, like the God is evil, whereas the Valentinians not so much. But this was the main point he disagreed with. Like, it's absolutely insane that you would think that the highest possible iteration of divine intelligence is evil. And obviously we know how he defines or dances around the problem of evil through highly matter. But it is quite Gnostic, and I do take a Gnostic tack to it, but only in this way. And I think you'll appreciate this. I view the Gnostic ideal as the pre-theurgic sort of viewpoint. Iamblichus would have called it fate, hymarmony, right? That's what Iamblichus says. He says, when before theurgic initiation, everything is hymarmony, fate, determinism. After theurgy, everything is charis, grace. providence. So the Gnostic viewpoint is the pre-initiatory or the pre-theurgic. Everything is fate, and you become a spiritual warrior. And then once you get above that, you become more mature in your gnosis. Then you understand, okay, it's not exact. It looked like that from the vantage point I was working in, but that's not actually the ultimate reality of it all.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I know that this is sort of a foreboding thing to ask for, because there are certain things in your kind of ecology of practices that you don't talk about. But I do want to push you to share an impactful experience within the sort of like initiatory or ritual context that was particularly, ontologically reorienting or profound on you. Is there a story to that effect that you can share?
Somewhat reluctantly, but sure. All right, I'll try my hardest not to be too long-winded with this. When I first joined the Golden Dawn, I didn't really know what it was. And so I was suspending my disbelief or my preconceptions. I didn't want to, I knew consciously that it was going to be bad news if I tried to take the wheel again. And what that meant in that situation is project my expectations on what this should be or could be or will be, and the outcome. The intended outcome. I just went with it. I allowed it to show me what it was. Now, somewhere around the portal degree, which for those who don't know, that is effectively you've gone to the top of the outer order, which is the Golden Dawn itself. And now you're preparing to enter, though you don't know it yet, the Rosicrucian inner order. Okay, the Rossae Rubiae Aurea Crucis. You're in the portal and they have you doing certain meditations or contemplations, visualizations. And one of these visualizations is to stand and imagine the sun as thinly veiled by clouds. And then while you're doing this, you recite as a mantra or contemplate specific lines from the Gospels, the ones that say that he that would save his life will surely lose it, yet he who would give up his life will surely save it. So on and so forth. Unless a corn of wheat fall and die, it cannot. So on and so forth. These kind of little almost Christian koans, all right? And that's really the first conscious smattering that you get of any kind of Christianity if you're not familiar with Christianity. Later, when I became familiar with Christianity, at this point I had walked away from it. I had rejected it entirely, which is why I was interested in this stuff in the first place, the occult and the Golden Dawn. Because I knew spirituality was real. I knew that there was a science here, a truth, a tradition, but I didn't think it was in the institutional church. And so I wasn't looking for counterculture. I wasn't looking for Satan or rebellion. I was just, what is over here? Is this what has it? And effectively, once I became more familiar with Christianity, I began to see how in the Golden Dawn rituals, there's a lot of the Gospels kind of peppered throughout the neophyte, which is the first initiation ritual, so on and so forth. But at this point, it's the first toying that anybody really does with Christianity. I then had a meditation. I was supposed to be meditating on something completely unrelated, and I had an intrusive vision. And at this point, you got to remember, I'm meditating for an hour a day at least for just under 3 years at this point.
Wow.
Okay, and
what is the sort of technique that you're using?
I like to sit in lotus. I have a meditation cushion that I don't know how with how heavy I am has held up.
You're a miasmatic taint.
My taint is very miasmic when I'm but I sit, I close my eyes, I do the fourfold breath, and I do that until I have arrived, so to speak, at the state of preparedness for visualization or contemplation. And how I know that happens is that I see an outer wheel and an inner wheel in the expanse of my mind's eye, and one turns in one direction and the other turns in the opposite direction. And then in the center, there is a little kind of, it's very similar to the color, the multiple colors you have of the curtains behind you, how it's kind of blue, kind of indigo purple. There's
Yeah.
this kind of like flame that flickers out.
I get that as well. I get that as well.
Exactly. It comes and it goes. And then as it recedes, gold will wash down. And then it'll burgeon forth. The gold will dissipate. The flame will come forward, then recede. Gold will wash down. So this is my way of, and many other people have.
I have a very similar experience. Yes,
exactly. Which is why you learn a system, because you get to see, other people. Like, this isn't just bullshit. It's not just the mind. We're all having a similar experience. So that I'll start with that, and then I had this, and then from there I'll do whatever work. You visualize a point, you visualize.
And I'm sorry again to cut you off, but what do you think that is? Like, when that phenomenology starts occurring, like what is it?
The thing is, anytime that my intellectual or discursive mind wants to put a label on something like that, what'll happen is I kind of jinx myself, and either I won't see it again for a little while, or it'll become increasingly difficult to get to a point where, at this point in my life, it takes about 30 seconds to a minute to generate that stuff at any given point. Why? Because I think that it has been called sort of symbolically many different things, but I think it's and this might not sound like it makes any sense, but it is the baseline core point of the self. It is the self in its most essential sort of representation. And one of the reasons why I think this is because I toyed with sort of feeling into that as three-dimensional space. And I realized that I'd lose complete proprioception. I don't have any sense of a body. Yeah. I have sense of space, that I am in a kind of a void, but like I can look up and down and like in 360 degrees almost simultaneously. It's very strange. And I've experimented with that against, and I kind of synchronistically fell into the material, but against the generation of the toroidal field, or really the perfection of the toroidal field, which is ultimately, it can relate to the work of theurgy, which is making the spiritual chariot spherical instead of ovoid. Right? There's a problem. There's a problem with the aura being shaped like an egg. It's not the perfect shape. Plato talks about it. Repair the circuits in our head. Proclus, Iamblichus, they all talk about it. This has to be made a sphere. Because that's the spiritual vehicle, and restoring it from that damage, that angularity. So I've kind of experimented with that. It's essentially a representation, astrally, etherically, to put it in convoluted terminology, but that some will understand. It's this expression of centeredness. What is, if I could look at my core, my ousia, my essence, what would it look like? And in this way, it looks like a flame, right? This blue flame, this indigo flame. And how do we refer to the soul in many traditions? The spark of the divine. So that's what I think. But again, thinking doesn't always get you where you want to go. So I reserve the right to change my mind on that. Yeah. But during one of these sessions at this time, I saw a figure robed with a massive amount of golden light pouring out from behind him. And he had what looked like a mitre.
Whoa.
Okay. Like a bishop's mitre. Yeah. Okay. And he was running in slow motion towards me. And I realized that I was kind of hanging onto a ledge, and that he slid towards the edge, this precipice, whatever I was hanging from, and he put his hand out, and he grabbed my hand and lifted me up just enough so that my elbows were like I had firm grasp, and then I watched him run away and dissolve into that light. At this point, mind you, I was not going to church. This is only the first part of what eventually happens, which is crazy. About a week later, now here's the thing. In the Golden Dawn, there is an officer in the outer order who leads you throughout all the rituals, most of the rituals, and they're called the hegemon. And their ensign of office, their scepter, has a mitre on it. And you are told that the mitre represents the highest aspirations of the individual soul. So in that way, right, there's that universal symbolism instead of the strictly personal, that I'm now understanding this vision I'm having through that lens. Anyway, so about a week later, I go to bed and I wake up. And I'm opening my eyes and I can't see anything but light. And I'm still sleepy. I'm not half asleep, but I'm still like sluggish, tired. And it's really weird because I'm blind for a little bit. And because I'm starting to panic, I have to stop myself and just breathe. And I close my eyes. And all of a sudden, I see a pair of feet on sand. And I don't see, but I feel 2 hands on my shoulders. And then I feel a hand on my head. Like one of these hands comes off and goes onto my head. And in that moment, it felt like 300 volts of electricity went directly through my body.
Whoa.
And the entire vision disappeared in a flash. And all I saw was a cross.
Whoa.
With a purple cloth draping from it, blowing in the wind. Now, to finally put this piece together, about a month after that, I'm approached by the temple chief of my temple, who effectively approaches me with this proposition to become somewhat of a successor. And when I agree, he does 2 things. And I didn't know any of this was happening. He does a battlefield commission. He knights me as a Templar in the CBCS tradition. And from there, he gives me, we schedule my diaconate ordination in the old Templar church, which is I was going to become a deacon on Easter of that year. And that was my entrance into the pre-Nicene kind of, esoteric, quasi-Gnostic church. From there, I then underwent my 5=6 ritual, which is the Adeptus Minor ritual. But that is the big one. That's the big one. Now, I unequivocally cannot talk about. But for anybody that wants to understand where this goes, you can read the 5-6 ritual, particularly the first third of it, to understand why that whole Christian component kind of foisted on me, coming out of left field almost, why that becomes so powerful specifically for that ritual.
Wow, man. So are these visions something that are unique to you, or are they sort of like prescribed as part of this initiatory
No, those were completely spontaneous. They were intrusive. They interrupted what I was supposed to be doing. Thinking about fucking geometric shapes. I'm on the inside of an octahedron, that kind of stuff.
Whoa.
Like that's the kind of stuff you're prescribed. Or like path workings on the tree of life. You're prescribed to do some of that. But these insane, intense, light-filled, electrical, somatic, it's just completely spontaneous. But it's a product of what I was undergoing, which was this purification on multiple levels, because I was divesting myself of everything I thought I was and thought I knew.
Yeah.
And at the same time, without even realizing it, moving closer to the heart of this tradition.
Dude, we got to wrap up soon, but I have to tell you something, because the way that you described that feeling of the electricity going through you and then everything just like evaporating.
Yeah.
That actually happened to me in a dream recently in a weird context that I just talked about on a patron podcast I put out a couple weeks ago. And so I was at this, it's one of those things, it's honestly one of these things that kind of like, it really shook me when it happened, because I've never experienced anything like this in a dream before, nor do I often ever have dreams like what I'm about to describe. So even the dream in and of itself was weird.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the sense that I wouldn't have even remembered being in this place if it didn't shake me out of the dream in this way. But I was at some sort of like outdoor bacchanal type thing where there's like this big, like very pagan feeling party going on.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just like sex and drugs crazy. It's like dancing and like fire and whatever. And I'm like watching all of this very like pagan stuff going on. And in the dream, I say the phrase, "I guess Yahweh took the week off." And as I said that in the dream, something like electrocuted me. like profaning the name of God sort of way. Like literally felt like it electrocuted me. I like went limp in the dream. Like I completely just felt like I got turned off, and the whole dream just went and just stopped. It just completely went away. And I was awake, and I still had the like tingle going through my body. And I was just like, what the fuck was that? Like I've never, ever, ever had that feeling before. Like the feeling of the electricity, like turning me off. Like just like almost like imagine just the feeling of like having an off switch.
Yeah.
Like that's what it felt like. It was crazy.
That's wild. That's wild. Yeah. And a lot of synchronistic stuff, I guess I must have hit on in this, but the feeling, the sensation that I got after having that, all that seemingly, I don't know what it was, but that energy, that electricity through me, it's very interesting that you bring that up. I had the opposite feeling. I felt like I had finally been turned on. And the dream evaporated, and the only thing I saw was this cross with like a shawl of some, like maybe, I don't know, maybe it was a burial cloth, but it was just blowing in the wind. But that's, you know, a lot of these, and this is attested throughout the, you know, different aspects of the tradition. That's why something like the tarot is so universal. A lot of these experiences, they do share like really radical, or I should say fundamental commonalities, which is why in the first place we're able to construct systems around having these experiences.
Yeah. Brother, you're such a passionate speaker. You're so articulate. You're so knowledgeable on all of these matters. And most of all, you're a joy to talk to. Like these are the kind of conversations that enliven me. They don't turn me off. They get the pneuma flowing.
Yeah.
They get the quintessence popping. So thank you, my friend. This is always so much fun. I feel like we're kindred spirits. We gotta keep having these conversations.
Yeah. I feel like I want to do something. I want to collaborate with you in a way that maybe we could do something that's kind of, maybe even if it's just like a 1-off, 2-off type of thing, but I've
already been thinking this.
Yeah,
actually.
It's not my channel. It's not your channel. We're just kind of doing this thing because I do feel like you're a kindred spirit, and not only that, but you occupy a very interesting space, which is that you've not kind of succumbed to the glamour and aesthetic of occultism and all that stuff, which can really get in the fucking way. So it is a joy to talk to you, man, and I'm honored to be on your show. I really am, because it's been a game-changing show for a lot of people, and I've only come to realize that in the last like year or so since we started talking. I'm like, you know, you're changing minds, and you're creating a forum out here for people to discuss this stuff that isn't like insane. You know?
You're too kind, man. Yeah. You're too kind. Well, yes, we will converse further post recording.
Yeah. One thing I want to tell you, I'm still off the record. No. Yes.